Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 27 of This Week is Live. I'm your host, Raymond Flowchat from mxdwn.com. That's Mixdown. Thanks for joining us. So glad to see you well. Got a lot of stuff going on, and we're very late getting on the air. Totally have to own that. Thank you so much for joining us in today's show. I'm going to get right into it, and there's a bunch of stuff to cover here today. So, first and foremost, we talked to you a lot last week about the WGA strike, the Writers Guild of America strike that's happening right now. And now we've started to see the effect of that strike starting to happen. And numerous shows have basically halted production because of writers being on strike. Without going into all the miasma of the strike and why it's happening, we covered that a lot last week in our previous episode. Tonight, we're basically going to just talk to you about what is now happening, right? There's a lot in terms of the negotiations or resolution to the negotiations. There's a lot of people striking at the various major media companies. But in the last week, just basically since it got going, shows including Daredevil Born Again, Severance, Hacks, Billions, Stranger Things, the final season of Stranger Things, Yellow Jackets, Abbott Elementary, Cobra Kai, the new upcoming Night of the Seven Kingdoms, The Hedge Knight, the Game of Thrones, another Game of Thrones spinoff, and Evil all have basically halted production in the wake of the news of everything that's going on. Basically, obviously, no writers to write the show. You can't really move forward on the show. Or even if a show had scripts written, you can't have any touch-ups on that, and you can't have anything going with that. So we'll continue to bring you news on this as this happens, as it unfolds. Secondly, in the world of games, we talked a little bit about some sales figures in the past, how various video games have, done well. And we talked to you a little bit about how God of War Ragnarok some months back had done 11 million units in its first 3 months, which was astronomically high for a PlayStation game. That's really huge. Well, there's a sequel that came out in February and is part of a really great game system called Horizon, or was first known as Horizon Zero Dawn. And essentially, the sequel was called Horizon Forbidden West. And that, within the first 3-4 months, it has come out, has sold 8.4 million copies, which is significant considering it's not one of the major titles or a Grand Theft Auto title or anything like that. That's a huge title that came out. Secondly, in the world of movies, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 came out. We talked a little bit about this last week, and I explained kind of my thoughts on the movie. It's a really wonderful movie and a really great finale to this series of space rock opera superhero movies that James Gunn created. And effectively, people have reacted appropriately. Now, since the pandemic happened, where most people were honestly, understandably afraid to be in movie theaters, the talk around much of insiders that are paying very close attention to movies and box office reports have basically indicated that it's been very hard to get people out to the movies. So numbers now are deflated where they might have been in the times before the pandemic. So Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 did 118 million, which came in higher than most pundits expected for its place in history, for this moment following the pandemic. As a point of comparison, when Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 came out some years back, and did 146 million in its opening weekend. And this is, of course, working backwards from inflation in terms of raw people coming to it. Obviously, most Marvel movies in the pre-pandemic times were doing huge numbers because the strength of the brand was so strong. And we've also talked a lot on this show about how in the last couple of years, some of the output hasn't been so great, not the least of which being Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. And by the way of comparison, over a 3-day weekend, when Ant-Man and the Wasp came out earlier this year, it did 106 million. But then, since it was President's Day weekend in February, when it finished President's Day weekend, the 4-day weekend had done just over 120 million. So you could look at this as doing just a little bit better. And most pundits, like I say, are considering this a success for the what is apparently the James Gunn swan song of these ragtag group of science fiction-esque superhero characters within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Elsewhere in the world of, television news, I guess you could say, those of us who grew up watching MTV in the 80s and the 90s probably remember it as having one corner of the network that was known as MTV News, which often did really great reporting and did really great journalism in its time in the midst of, all the other silliness that MTV's ever done, or just constant play of music videos, or then even when there were times when it went into less music videos and more reality TV. And effectively, MTV News is being shut down completely. Variety has been reporting that effectively the head of the massive conglomerate of networks has essentially indicated that massive layoffs are going to happen across the Showtime, MTV, and Paramount Media. And in the midst of this, he issued a memorandum. His name is Chris McCarthy, who is the Paramount Media Network's president, and he issued the following memorandum to the staff at the company, where he said, However, despite the success in streaming, we continue to feel pressure from broader economic headwinds like many of our peers. To address this, our senior leaders in coordination with HR have been working together over the past few months to determine the optimal organization for the current and future needs of our business. He goes on to say, as a result, we have made the very hard but necessary decision to reduce our domestic team by approximately 25%. This is a tough yet important strategic realignment of our group. Through the elimination of some units and by the streamlining of others, we'll be able to reduce costs and create a more effective approach to our business as we move forward. Today, we will notify employees whose positions are being impacted, with leaders communicating the news directly to those team or individuals. These meetings will be followed by individuals one-on-ones with our HR partners. I realize these decisions will be hard for everyone, most of all, those who will be leaving. It's not something we take lightly. So, as a part of this, apparently, Variety is reporting that several divisions are going to be scuttled completely as a result of the layoffs of 25% of the collective workforce. But within that, ultimately, MTV News, which had been around forever as a part of the MTV network, and then to some extent, at least as a newswire, always had really credible reporting in the early days of Mixdown. We used to watch MTV News' site for music news journalism every single day, gone completely, totally being terminated, no longer going to be a thing. So RIP MTV News. And then lastly, a little bit of a happier piece of news in terms of we've had tons of really crappy, sad news, difficult things, lots of different stuff that we talked about on this show. But here's a little happy piece of news, which is Dolly Parton has made good on her announcement to create and finish a rock album. Now, Dolly Parton had been basically nominated to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. She initially said she didn't want to accept it because she never really did a rock album, which is, of course, obviously true. Dolly Parton's a national treasure and an amazing human being, but effectively didn't really ever do a rock album. So being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, does that make sense or not? That's a whole other debate, and it's not really a big deal. But she wasn't really interested in taking it. They basically said, no, we're definitely going to give it to you. And then she ultimately kind of turned around on that, and she showed up and she did a really great series of performances at the Rock Hall induction ceremony. And so now, as a result of that, she has fulfilled her promise to make a rock album, which is not so surprisingly titled Rockstar. And it features a bevy of pretty impressive people from across the spectrum of different genres that are going to help contribute to making this a rock record. And amongst them, not to be left out, is Richie Sambora, who used to be a part of Bon Jovi, Sting, Steve Perry, who of course used to be the famous singer from Journey, John Fogerty, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, along with Warren Haynes, Peter Frampton, Joan Jett, and the Blackhearts. Very interesting. Chris Stapleton, Miley Cyrus, they've worked together a lot over the years. Pink and Brandi Carlile on the same song, Debbie Harry from Blondie, Elton John, Melissa Etheridge, Lizzo. Interesting. That should be fun. One song that includes Rob Halford and Nikki Sixx and John Five from Motley Crue, and John Five now being in Motley Crue since Mick Mars is no longer a part of the band. And Simon Le Bon from Duran Duran, Linda Perry, Emmylou Harris, and Sheryl Crow, once again on the same song, Michael McDonald, and then one song near the end, basically, obviously, a cover of Freebird featuring Ronnie Van Zant and Gary Rossington. Now, as we wrap up here today, and just to kind of finish off for this particular show today, I am heading out not long after this. And for those of you who can see, I'm wearing a Mr. Bungle t-shirt. I'm going to see Mr. Bungle and the Melvins on the return of their legendary Geek Show tour that they did a lot in the early 2000s and haven't done much since. And then not long after that, I'm jumping in a car and I'm heading off through the desert and I'm going over to Las Vegas to see the Sick New World Festival, which promises to be bananas because there's about 100 bands playing across 4 stages in little more than 11 hours. So it's going to be something, and I don't really know what to say about all that. I'm going to see and cover it and take pictures and write about it and all the fun stuff that we ever do. And well, that'll be hopefully live over the weekend. So if you're seeing this, watch Mixdown. You should see all that coverage coming through. And of course, if you're watching this at the YouTube after the fact, after we post it next week, all that coverage will be live. So please check it out. We'll try to put the link for all that coverage in the comments and the description section for this one, and we post it on YouTube. But effectively, I just wanted to take a moment today because it definitely seems applicable given everything that's kind of going on in the world and everything that's going on for me today as I was kind of trying to ready myself to get on the road and get out the door. And effectively, which is stress. And to put it in the simplest terms, I've said this, in my private life to anybody who care to listen, stress is a cancer. And it is a kind of an unfortunate byproduct of living in this world, right? When we're young, we don't care about much. Parents take care of us. We do what we're going to do. We try to have as much fun as we can. We get through school, and things aren't that bad. But you get into adult life, big ocean of work and responsibility and bills and laundry and difficulties and setbacks and things going wrong and overage charges and all kinds of annoyances. And, for many of us in this world ever basically since 2016, so that's almost 7 years, life has taken a really weird and strange, annoying kind of tone. And the tempo of everything has gone from being like, things were something and various things are going on, and maybe you're trying to do stuff, to holy cow, complicated responsibility, piles and piles and piles of it. And then, as everything with that was going on, shifting from there into pandemic life for a couple of years, hiding from reality, hiding from other people. I mean, wear masks everywhere you go, fearing a highly contagious airborne virus, and having to think about vaccines and having to make sure that you're inoculated, protected, or when you're sick, what do you do? How do you contend with that? All the while having to make a living, having to find a way to support yourself, having to find a way to keep the lights on, to make sure things are going smoothly. And that's no picnic, right? And then we're coming out of that into a reality where inflation has gone wild and things are expensive and the price of everything is more than it should be. And now there's those ever present rumblings, which of course is a part of the reason that we talked about the layoffs at MTV News today. We talked about layoffs at lots of different companies and lots of different media markets, right? Companies that were swollen, growing and growing and growing during the pandemic when everyone was, getting government bailout money and spending that money, and the economy was, richly inflated behind that. And effectively now everybody's starting to pull back. And of course, inflation is causing everyone to pull back, right? Things are too expensive. So everyone's starting to think, maybe I shouldn't spend money on this. I got to save my money. I don't have enough money for everything. And then that ripple effect is creating a domino effect of different companies starting to lay people off. And a lot of the time, it's the insidious kind of argument of, oh, maybe things are going to be difficult. And then that means, just to try to protect against that, to try to keep from, I don't know, a hit to the profit margin, let's just start laying people off left, right, and center. And, one by one, these things start to pile up, things start to get really difficult. And stress is a thing, right? Like in all of our lives, unless you're a person who just legitimately doesn't care. And I know there's a good many of you out there who probably just don't. And for those of you that don't, it's probably not so bad. I mean, you don't care. It's cool. But for those of us that care, and for those of us that are trying, and those of us that want to do good in this world, are trying to help make things better, for those of us that are out there doing the best that we can, it can be abominable. And I don't think I'm saying anything that is wildly prophetic. I'm not trying to come at this like I'm some kind of A+ counselor or anything like that. But if it isn't obvious, or if you just need to hear someone say it, you find those moments when things are as stressful as they can be. There's never a better time to pull yourself back and to try to find a way to reclaim some of that for yourself. At the end of the day, if you're not feeling centered and if you're not feeling okay in your world, what is the point of all this, right? Of course, got to keep the lights on. Sometimes you might not have a choice. The only job you have might be insanely stressful. It might be hard to get away from that. It might be impossible. It might be the only thing you can do for a time. But whatever you can, take those moments for yourself. Pull yourself away from the things that are happening, especially for creative folks, right? Mixdown spends a lot of time talking about the arts, music, movies, games, and television. And there's a lot of people, and the sacrifice, the payment for being attached to something so pure and so great is often usually suffering. Many people work or live destitute most of their lives in the service of trying to make something pure, in the service of trying to make something great. A lot of people spend most of their careers wishing they could do just a little better, seeing the Taylor Swifts and the Billie Eilishes of the world go rocket fuel while the rest of us have to work for a living and try and try and try and try. And whoever you are and wherever you are in your world, remind yourself when those moments come, when it feels like everything's boxing down around you, when everything is so stressful that you can't take it, those are the best moments to stop. As much as it may feel like things will spin out of control, as much as it feels like things might be abominably hard, take that moment for yourself and collect yourself. Breathe in. Breathe out. Take that moment to just pause, pump the brakes, let everything kind of catch up with itself. Go for a walk if you can. If it's nice enough where you live, go for a walk. Get outside, just breathe, shake things up. Take a moment, listen to your favorite song. Or if you're inclined, and not everybody's necessarily inclined, meditate. Take a moment and just be at one with yourself. Breathe deeply. There's lots of great resources out there in terms of free sources for meditation, but you can, if you just want to, take your favorite, most peaceful song and make sure it's something longer than 4 or 5 minutes. Give yourself a solid 10 minutes just to get outside your brain and outside your thoughts and just focus on your breathing. Pull yourself away from that stress. Give yourself a chance to come back to home, to come back to center. And every little thing you can do to further that, especially in the midst of a really complicated and rough time, will be all the better for the long run in terms of both coping with it, but also being able to navigate through it, to find that way to the higher ground in terms of trying to find a more stable place to be in terms of feeling comfortable. That's all for This Week is Live. Thank you so much again for joining us, as we say every week. If you don't already, please follow us on Twitch. Please subscribe to us on YouTube if you engage with this content, any of the many places that we post it, whether it's on Twitch where we're broadcasting this live, or if it's on YouTube where we post these after the fact the next week, or if it's any of the other social media platforms that we take various clips and things like this and run, whether that's in YouTube in Shorts or whether that's in Instagram, whether that is in Facebook or Twitter. We thank you so much for engaging with the content. Please join us again. We'll be back with all kinds of stories, and we've got something special that we just filmed the other day. Going to see a little bit more about that very, very soon. Maybe in next week's episode, we'll see. It depends on how the next week goes. We've got something kind of special that we did and all other kinds of video content. So please keep the dial set to our YouTube and all the great stuff that we've got coming for you. We'll be back again next Thursday at roughly around 5:30 p.m. Pacific time. Hopefully next week can be a little bit better on time than we were this time. But thanks again for joining us. So glad to see you well.